The Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. We continue our discussion of The Lost Maiden of Heaven by Geoffrey Shaw. We were in the middle of chapter 5, the counterinsurgency plan, and I want to begin on page 114.
Okay.
This kind of summarizes what we said, some of us said at the last session, about a third of the way down that page. As Robert Thompson explained, and Lillian has mentioned, he's the one who kind of was in charge of the counterinsurgency efforts in Malaysia, which were very successful. The insurgent challenge in Malaya was the same as it was in Vietnam. The insurgents in both places were contesting the incumbent regime's legitimacy and offering themselves as the authentic voice of the people.
Mm-hmm.
So, if Diem is speaking for the United States, he's not the voice of the people.
That's right.
You got to speak for the Vietnamese people. That's the lost mandate of the title.
Yes.
He had the mandate. He had the people's support, even the Buddhist support, which is a majority Buddhist country, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Onward, Vivian.
And so another point that you made last time, Father, is articulated on page 115 in the middle. The Americans were vulnerable to communist propaganda. This propaganda that Diem was a puppet and not the voice of the people is because they lacked patience. That's what you said. In order to go about the way Thompson and Diem, and we'll see later, his brother New also was a big player in coming up with the Strategic Hamlet program. That was going to take time and patience. And
yeah, but also, Vivian, I mean, I agree with that about time and patience. But the other problem is that that the Americans, insofar as they are being imperialists, are actually justifying the communist propaganda. It's not just a question of patience; it's a question of that they're actually giving the communists weapons insofar as the Americans are taking over, right? They're actually giving the communists the weapons of propaganda and say, look, this is just an army of occupation.
That's right. And in fact, on that same paragraph I was reading from, look at the lines starting with American politicians expected rapid results to flow from their wealth and power, and they needed them in order to please the press and through them their constituencies. Hanoi, meaning the North Vietnamese, took advantage of this weakness by denying the Americans a quick victory.
And that, of course, is the weakness. We are getting too deep and heavy here in terms of philosophy. This, of course, is the weakness of our present mechanism of democracy. I'm absolutely someone who believes in democracy in the sense of the politics should be grassroots level. People should be empowered. But these elections every 4 years, with the politicians always got his mind, except perhaps for the first year after the election. From the second year onwards, you've got his mind on the next election, right?
Yes.
So so if you've got something like a monarchy or a totalitarian dictatorship, such as communism, but the same person going to be in charge. I mean, Putin now, for instance, in Russia, right? He can just wait until Biden's not there anymore. He just twiddle his thumbs. And see what the dice throws at the next election. So there is a weakness of inherent instability in a temporal sense, in the fact that things are changing all the time, and the governments are always thinking about keeping the electorate happy for the next imminent election. I'm not saying the alternatives might be worse, and that's a whole different discussion. But there is an inherent weakness there,
And it's an old problem. Tell it to the Athenians. The
Right.
Athenians were a democratic city-state, and their chief rival, the Spartans, were not. And so who ran down the other eventually?
Yeah.
I mean, it's an old problem, right? And so here's the other thing that's a strength to that, by the way, is that, and yet this weakness of a man like Harriman, making inroads because he gave money to the campaign and so on. Well, in our system of government, the military is under the authority of the civilian democratically elected government. So So
that's an extremely good point, Vivian, because why do we think we have the right to not practice what we preach when we're in someone else's country? Right? The military goes above the legitimate government. No, it has to be the other way around.
It has to be the other way around, but that will make you in a militarily inferior position vis-a-vis countries that don't have that problem.
Well, except in this case, it's actually causing the problem. Now, the US insistence of putting the military above the legitimate government of Diem is actually giving the Viet Cong the weapons that they need to say this is an imperial occupation.
Yes, I see what you're saying. So here, it's a weird mirror reflection. Here in our country, our decision making is subject to the civil democratic processes. The people who end up in State Department are chosen by the president, who's elected by the people, blah, blah, blah. That's always going to be suffering from these political, the political dynamics of a democratic society. And our military is under that kind of authority. And here in Vietnam, and that's got its weaknesses, but here in Vietnam, we're trying to reverse that and put the military on top, which is what we do after we have Diem assassinated. We create a military junta, and that starts running the show. So there are a lot of ironies here.
Yes, indeed.
But here we go. Thompson concluded, still on 116, Hanoi would make the war a test of wills, not of strength. That's what you were talking about, the twiddling of thumbs.
Exactly.
They can take all the time in the world. This is their country. They live there.
There's an election coming up in the United States next year. We'll just hang on because, but who knows what's going to happen at that point.
Yeah, it's summed up in top of page 116, very first line. The key to Hanoi's strategic planning then was American impatience.
Yep. And we've seen this played out over and over and over again. Shall we mention Afghanistan? These people will sooner or later tire out with all of this. They'll leave. We'll still be here. And by the way, that's one of their talking points when communists or other kinds of insurgencies are trying to win over the people. One of their talking points is, in fact, the Americans aren't going to be here forever. When they're gone, we'll still be here. So you better pick our side now.
Right. Of course, just to use a metaphor or an analogy, as regards to this sort of political situation, it's a game of chess. If one side, with the clock, if one side has 3 times as much time to play with as the other side, you just take your time, right? You can make the right decision, force the other person into having to rush, and they're going to make the mistake. And once they've made the mistake, you can actually advance on that mistake.
Mm-hmm.
All right, moving forward. Let's see. Well, this is about the Strategic Hamlet Program, SHP, is the abbreviation here.
Right, because the Americans came up with the CIP. They had their own counterinsurgency program, and Diem and Thompson found a lot of weaknesses in it and came up with an alternative, the Strategic Hamlet Program, which was based on building the Vietnamese society from the bottom up. And yes, using the army to create defense perimeters around agrarian villages, but then building up a local self-defense corps, and that then exercising that kind of leadership in their villages would then naturally lead to a more democratic kind of city-state, if you will, right? Where the people are locally running their own affairs.
And I think I've said this already, but maybe the last session, the session before, but I think it warrants reiterating. In the middle of page 118, talking about security measures should be undertaken by police as opposed to soldiers. And then a few lines further down, but if an army unit spent too long in a given area, daily life for the average Vietnamese would take on the regimen of military occupancy, occupation. So again, I think I've mentioned this before, but at the start of the troubles in Northern Ireland, in the late 1960s, the Protestants were a majority in Belfast. And the Protestants started rioting against the Catholic minority and basically terrorized the Catholic minority. And the British government brought in the British Army to actually protect the Catholics from the Protestant riots against them. And when the British Army turned up, the Catholics were bringing cups of tea to the soldiers. They were so relieved to see them because they were protecting them. But the British Army remained.
Yes.
And of course, the Catholics already, the nationalists, they don't want British rule, they want Irish rule. And very quickly, the IRA, right, could start propagandizing this is an army of occupation.
That's
and within
right.
a couple of years, the same people that were giving the soldiers cups of tea were blowing them to pieces with bombs.
Yep. And the same thing has happened over and over again. I used Afghanistan as an example. You know, we're supposedly protecting these people from the Taliban. And at first they're happy about that. But then what are we hanging about for? Now we've become an occupying army. Who wants that in their neighborhood? Nobody.
Right.
And then it becomes a talking point for the Taliban that like we've just said. And so this is really a sticky problem.
Here's a contrast also. I think they gave a little bio sketch of Edward Herman. He did not come from wealthy antecedents. I think he earned his way, but he became wealthy and influential and so on. But then he was a man of great wealth and influence and power. Diem, although he was from a family which is a respected family in Vietnam, began his political career in these agrarian circumstances, in these little villages, and he became a provincial director and that sort of thing. So he was aware of what goes on, and it's hard for us as Americans to imagine an agrarian society anymore. You know, we have Norman Rockwell pictures and stuff like that, but you know, in the early 1900s, I think 98% of Americans were on a farm in some way or other, or at least late 1800s. But now it's the other way around. Whereas in Vietnam, it was still an agrarian society. And so what happened on the farm in these villages, these hamlets, was incredibly important for what happened to the country.
Mm-hmm.
As you say, Father, Diem had a hands-on experience. He knew what he was talking about.
And Nolting saw that when he first arrived, and he went with Diem out into the countryside and saw his knowledge and expertise. Yep.
Anything more on chapter 5?
Well, we have here on 120, so we have these clashing, the U.S. counterinsurgency plan and the strategic Hamlet plan, and then we have poor Ambassador Nolting caught between the two on the top of 120. Ambassador Nolting was caught in a dilemma. On one hand, he genuinely liked both Diem and Thompson and could see the value of the very practical, non-military approach that Thompson was advocating. On the other hand, it was his duty as U.S. mission chief in South Vietnam to adhere to the instructions from Washington and to implement American policy.
Yeah, he's in an impossible situation because he's got orders he has to obey, even though he knows that they're wrong. That's the situation.
But I think he did it in a noble way. I mean, my impression of him from reading about this book is he was a decent person who wanted to be faithful to his own obligations to his country, at the same time was not willing to throw Diem under the bus and do whatever he could to try and support what he believed was really the best path here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I like about this book. There are heroes and villains, and there are quite a few heroes, people of honor and integrity who did their best in difficult circumstances.
Here's another little key.
I'm talking specifically actually about the Americans here. You know, they were and the British person. Who was it? Thompson was a British person, right? But Nolting and there are several really good Americans here.
Colby and Lansdale.
Yeah.
Also, there's another little hint of something that I think is important on the bottom of 124. So the strategic Hamlet program, creating these little almost city-states, really. This new polity, this is the bottom of the page, would find its roots in rural South Vietnam. We're talking about now Diem and his brother's plans are to transform the whole country, starting with the rural areas. And this new polity, they're talking about the whole country, would find its roots in rural South Vietnam and would replace the elite in Saigon.
Yeah.
That was a holdover from French colonial days. So Diem, we hear a lot off and on about the enemies that he has made among the ruling class, basically, in Vietnam. So
yeah, look at this. This is actually a Catholic idealist here.
yes,
So the bottom of page. This is actually, I think this is new, not the DM's brother.
yes,
But I'm sure they speak as one. So towards the bottom of page 124, he believed they could constitute the foundation for a new social and political order. This new polity, which you talk about, finally was rural South Vietnam and would replace the elite in Saigon that was a holdover from French colonial days. New was concerned that if the Americans had too large a hand in the strategic hamlets, they would undo the necessary desire within the South Vietnamese for self-reliance. Right? Basically, people want to actually, we hear the phrase self-empowerment all the time now, right? But people do actually want to have some control over their own lives, over their own economic and political destiny. And and that's exactly what this SHP program was aiming at, is to make these people self-reliant, to make them able to be self-sufficient as communities, and therefore to be invested, to be stakeholders, to use the new phrase,
yep,
right, in their lives, and that would make them antagonists towards the communists because they already have a stake in their local community,
that's
right?
right.
Rather than feeling alienated or dispossessed.
Right. But that, you know what that involves? That involves allowing those people to be armed,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
That we're looking now at why we have the Second Amendment. That Second Amendment in this country that gives people a right to bear arms is in order for them to be able to serve in local militias for their own self-defense, right? And
as
that's
I say to my friends in England who are opposed to how easy it is to get guns in the United States, I say, well, it beats the United Kingdom, where the only people that have guns are the government and the criminals.
right. But there's
the deep blue sea over there, right?
But there's also the risk involved. So I don't know if it's in this chapter or the next chapter, but one reason why the American military was against this plan of arming the rural Vietnamese is because when those villages did get taken over by the Viet Cong, and they often did, in spite of best efforts to stop it, guess where all those arms went then? And those trained militiamen, what did they become? Those armaments went to the Viet Cong, and those guys started fighting for the Viet Cong. So you could see how, these are wonderful ideas, but putting them into practice.
That's where you have to win the hearts as well, and that's what DM wanted to do. You've got to win the hearts of the people as well. You can't just, But what the imperialistic approach was guaranteed to lose the
yes,
hearts.
That's right,
and that's exactly what happened.
That's exactly right. And in fact, oh my gosh, there's a quote somewhere here. It might be still coming, where someone in the American side is saying, well, this plan of Diem and Thompson, this is going to take 12 years. We don't have that much time. Guess how long America was in Vietnam? 12 years. Only we lost. Imagine if we'd spent those 12 years trying to implement this plan. You see?
Yeah.
There's the irony is so rich.
There's small improvements moving in the right direction every year, rather than let's fix the whole thing instantly, right?
Yep. But it wasn't instant. 12 years is not instant. 50,000
No, I
lives,
know, right? Exactly.
That's what's so funny. They thought they were going to get this over. When was the last time you heard we'll all be home in time for Christmas? Right?
Well,
why do we keep falling for this?
Also, 50,000 American lives.
Yes, that's what I mean.
What about how many Vietnamese were lost?
I don't even know. Way more than that.
So on to chapter 6. We talked about this already. This focuses on the theme: policemen, that is, local people helping to defend their hamlet with support of military, versus soldiers, who would be the primary.
Who would be the professional gun carriers, right?
Yeah.
Right. That's what this chapter is about. The differences.
There's a couple of things here I think that I think are quite important. Again, I'm orientating myself towards Rerum Novarum, Quadragesimo Anno, the teachings of the church. But the footnote 9 on page 128. He's quoting Phillips's memo, who was someone who supported New in the strategic Hamlets. He said the imposition of democracy at the top in an underdeveloped country brought anarchy, which resulted in dictatorship. Again, this is very Platonic, right? This is very much the Republic, right? The anarchy. If democracy leads to anarchy, what happens after anarchy is dictatorship. Democracy must be instituted at a level where the people can understand it and where it can be a revolution to eliminate the existing system of privileges and the defeatism and separatism which exists in the minds of the people. In other words, the authentic, sustainable democracy has to be from the grassroots up, right, and not imposed by the central government down. And then, as regards to Christianity, the Catholicism of New and Diem, the top paragraph on page 129 here. New also told Phillips that Viet Cong should be allowed to surrender and to rejoin their communities. This tactic was in keeping with the British experience in Malaya, where communist guerrillas had been successfully encouraged to switch sides. New and Diem hoped to minimize the killing of insurgents by winning over as many as possible, and this concept was later developed into the Open Arms Program, or Chu Hoi. This avoidance of bloodshed whenever possible sprang from the Ngo Dinh brothers' Catholic faith. So, and this is not just naivete. We're talking about naivete. This is absolutely a practical way of doing things. Most of the Viet Cong are not committed Marxists.
That's right.
Because we always think that this man's a communist. He's completely on board with everything. He's read Das Kapital, the Communist Party manifesto. He knows Catholic. So he knows communist ideology back to front. No, right? For whatever reason, he's fighting on that side, probably for reasons that are fairly shallow. And those people can very quickly be won over and actually used. And that's what the Viet Cong did the other way around very successfully. So what Diem and New are asking is that these people, rather than just kill them because they are the enemy, right? No, convert them, right? Show a spirit of reconciliation, convert them, have them come over to our side.
That's right. And for anyone out there who might say, well, a U.S. military would never go along with such a, foolhardy idea. Well, in fact, the war that's been going on in the Congo, the cobalt and all this stuff that's there that people are fighting over. And there was a guerrilla gang of warriors, and they increased their numbers by kidnapping young boys, actually, out of Uganda and maybe other places too, I don't know. And so, and trying to find these guys in the jungles of the Congo, and to find them and track them down and hunt them down and kill them. And for everyone you kill, then 3 more pop up, Well, the U.S. military, I don't remember when I read this article, they began a conversion campaign, Joseph. They started to fly helicopters over the areas where they thought they might be hiding with leaflets saying, if you surrender, we promise to reunite you with your families. Because it turns out at this point, most of the troops now in this guerrilla group were all kidnapped as boys. And they started pouring these leaflets. If you come out, if you surrender, we will not kill you. We will return you to your families. We will rehabilitate your lives, and so on. And they actually got men coming out of the jungle and crossing the border back into Uganda. So, Christianity works.
Exactly.
We should try it more often.
Yeah, precisely.
Joseph, you quoted this Phillips fellow. I want to say something about him. On page 127, Rufus Phillips. Now, if your name is Rufus, you're all philosophical. I mean, you've been born to a family that has kind of classical inclinations. Rufus Phillips, a CIA operative, supported William Colby. So that's who he is. And then on page 129, just after what you quoted, Joseph, new paragraph there, William Colby, who had more influence over the direction of the SHP, the program, than any other American, discerned that New had embarked on a program that had real potential for stopping and reversing communist political advances in the countryside. I mean, I am not currently a big proponent of a strong CIA. The more I learn what they've done in assassinations and trying to influence other governments and spending hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, in interfering elsewhere, I'm pretty negative. But here it looks like we had some CIA people who are actually trying to do the right thing and help the people.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then please God, thank God when it happens. But yeah, I think you're right. If you have an agency that's under the control of a huge central government that also has the right to be secret, you're in trouble.
And yet every government, every nation has to have intelligence gathering on their foreign enemies, for sure. That what's horrible is when they turn that on their own people.
Yes,
But
espionage. Shakespeare's very good on espionage. Hamlet, particularly. The espionage involves lying. It's almost impossible to be a spy without being morally compromised.
That's right.
And blackmailing and entrapment. I mean, it's all part of the game. Well, that's the sort of game. It's like prostitution, right? It's not a game we should be playing.
And they use prostitutes too. Yeah, honeypots,
yes.
honeypots, right?
That's my case.
Yeah, but it's a dirty business. But we do need intelligence. I mean,
not at any cost.
Not at any cost.
Evil means to a good end.
I'm not advocating evil means. All I said is that we need intelligence. That's all.
Yeah.
And by the way, an author who really deals with the complexities and the moral compromises is Graham Greene. Some of his novels are about morally compromised spies who've lived lies for so long. They've destroyed.
I agree. We don't want to go off on a tangent. My problem with Graham Greene is he seems to luridly enjoy the dilemmas that he presents. But that's nothing.
I don't blame him too much for that.
Yeah,
people like reading thrillers and. Anyway, we can stop there. But
I just want to say one more thing. We can't really go into that path, but in a sense, if you become a spy, you're immediately representing yourself as something you're not.
That's right.
So there's a moral compromise you have to make even to get into the game.
That's right.
You're agreeing to live a lie from the ground zero.
Right. That's right.
All right.
It's tricky business.
Onward.
Where do we want to go next? Does anybody have something
in this chapter? Well, there's a hint here on page 131 of what's going to come later. 4 lines down. In particular, New York Times reporter David Halberstam and Associated Press reporter Neil Sheehan wrote negative articles about Diem's SHP and Knowlton's support of it.
Yeah.
So, and when we're here several thousand miles away from Vietnam, and we don't have that many Vietnamese relatives or friends or people we can talk to, where do you find out about this country? Right.
And in fact, they were wrong. They overstated the case because it turns out that the relocation of these peasants, it was up to a maximum of 3 miles from where they were before, and only the remaining 5% was it likely to be necessary to move all houses entirely to a new site. What they were doing was they were to get these strategic hamlets.
Circle the wagons.
To circle the wagons, because these farmers were all spread up and down the Mekong River, and were easy to pick off one by one. So get them closer together, but somehow allow them enough land to farm, because they're growing rice, and you need to be on the river or in the delta to grow rice. So it was overstated. I'm sure there were people, though.
Well, rule number 1 is we need to be skeptical of what the media says. Period.
That's right.
We want same thing as signing agreements, right? You want verification. You want to be able to ensure that what you're being told is true. But on page 142, if we're aiming to try to finish up this chapter before the end of the session, what I found very interesting here. This is a footnote 31 or 51. So Hillsman fought in Burma during World War II, if I remember from earlier. And he says, he has combat experience in the sort of situation that the Vietnam War would be, fighting in the Asian jungle. And he says, consider, for example, Hillsman's praise for Thompson, quote, the more I reflected on my own experience as a guerrilla in Burma and imagined what it would have been like if we had been facing strategic hamlets during World War II, the more I was persuaded. So, so we've just been talking about Catholic social teaching and putting principles into practice. And it's very easy to think, okay, well, that's just a theory, but what about real life, reality? This is a man who fought in the jungles of Burma, right? And he thought about what if we had to face an armed local population in hamlets that were fortified, it would have made things much, much more difficult. So, this is a person saying this actually, on a purely military level, let alone a political, philosophical level, actually has practical use.
That's right. Just think of so many little Switzerlands gathered across South Vietnam. That's really the idea, right? A citizenry that defends itself, governs itself.
And
that's what they were aiming at.
Nobody has ever tried to invade Switzerland. The Nazis didn't try to invade Switzerland. No one's tried to invade Switzerland because it's too difficult and the costs are too high.
That's right. Mountains help.
It's true. Good. Well, I think we've covered the
main ideas.
The main ideas of this chapter. So let's conclude this, and we'll be back next session with Chapter 7, the abrogation of Knowlton's rapprochement. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at forumedbookclub.ignatius.com.